Hi, do you want to learn about a man whose parents were more related than two siblings? A guy who could barely speak or eat? As late as the 19th century, you might find a man like him in an insane asylum, but on September 17th, 1665, you would find him ascending the throne of Spain. The epitome of the so-called Habsburg jaw, Charles II of Spain was the King of Spain from the age of 3 until he kicked the old oaken bucket on November 1st, 1700, just 5 days before his 39th birthday. Charles oversaw the Habsburg ruling of Spain that began in 1504 and had remained unbroken since 1516. Before that, they ruled over parts or all of Austria and other lands starting in 1273. To understand how our friend Charles II came to be, we'll first take a brief look into how the House of Habsburg managed to become so powerful. Around 1025, Radbot, Count of Klettgau, built a fortress in present-day Switzerland and named it Habsburg. Radbot's grandson, Otto II, took Habsburg as part of his name, becoming the first Count of Habsburg. 5 generations later, in 1273, things started to get interesting. After gaining power through various conflicts near their home in Alsace and Switzerland, siding with the Pope in a conflict against the Emperor and cozying up with the other powerful German nobles, Count Rudolf von Habsburg was elected King of Germany, also known as the Holy Roman Emperor. This formerly lowly Swabian count went on to defeat Ottokar II of Bohemia in 1278 to acquire the duchies most known for belonging to the Habsburgs, Styria and Austria. Rudolf installed his 2 sons, Albert I and Rudolf II, in these new Habsburg territories and, later, attempted to take territory elsewhere in the empire with less significant success. Rudolf von Habsburg lived until 1291, his legacy being known as the man who started what would give Europe a front-row seat to one of the continent's most famous dynasties. After Rudolf established the Habsburgs as a major seat of power, the house's successes came south and westward, taking Carniola and Carinthia in 1335, Tyrol in 1369, and parts of Istria later in the 1300s. After a 111-year territorial split between the 3 sons of one of Austria's leaders beginning in 1379 and a brief stint of leadership over Bohemia and Hungary, the Habsburg lands in Austria were reunited in 1490 by Duke Frederick V. After a strategic marriage with the Duke of Burgundy's daughter to his son, Maximilian, and of course, all the right people dying, the Burgundian Netherlands were officially brought under the rule of Rudolf's grandson, Philip the Handsome, in 1493. Philip then married Joanna of Castile, the daughter of Isabella and Ferdinand, and heiress to the crowns of Aragon and Castile, including holdings in Italy like Sardinia, Sicily, and Naples, and their New World colonies. After the death of Isabella, Philip was King of Castile for almost an entire year before dying in 1506. Ferdinand, the King of Aragon, ruled as Joanna's regent until his death in 1516. Prompting the crowning of Charles I, Philip and Joanna's oldest son, as the King of Castile and Aragon after Joanna's confinement due to insanity. This earned her her title, Joanna the Mad. As Charles was Philip's heir, he had inherited the Burgundian Netherlands in 1506 at the ripe old age of 6, and later the Austrian lands when his grandfather, Maximilian I, died in 1519. Now we're going back in time a little bit to check out what was going on in Central Europe during all of this. After Rudolf's death, the same year that Philip the Handsome gained the Burgundian Netherlands in 1493, Rudolf's son, Maximilian I, arranged a double wedding with the ruler of Hungary and Bohemia, this guy, Vladislaus II. Maximilian's grandson and granddaughter married Vladislaus's daughter and son on the 22nd of July, 1515. After, again, the right people dying, Ferdinand, Maximilian's grandson and the second son of Philip the Handsome, became King of Hungary and Bohemia in 1526. But wait, if Ferdinand was the second son of Philip the Handsome and Charles I of Spain was his first son, doesn't that make them brothers? Why, yes it does. And better yet, Charles had so much power that he had his younger brother rule Austria for him, which he did starting in 1521. A few years before, in 1519, when Charles received the titles in Austria, the Habsburgs had reached the peak of their power and influence when the 19-year-old Charles I of Spain was elected to be the Holy Roman Emperor, becoming the famous Charles V, King of Spain, Archduke of Austria, Duke of Burgundy, and Lord of the Netherlands. His Italian holdings included Naples, Sicily, and Sardinia, and the colonies he controlled formed the empire on which the sun never set. His younger brother, Ferdinand, was the king of Hungary and Bohemia. After the heroically successful defense of Vienna, struggles against France and Italy, and attempting to stem the spread of Protestantism for most of his reign, Charles V left a massive mark on Europe before dying in 1558. His death caused a split in the houses, with the Austrian Habsburgs, led by Charles's brother Philip, inherited the Archduchy of Austria and the kingdoms of Hungary and Bohemia, and the Spanish Habsburgs, led by Charles's son, also named Philip, or officially Philip II of Spain, inherited the Netherlands, Spanish holdings, and Italian holdings, including the newly acquired Duchy of Milan, secretly gifted to Philip II in 1540, and then officially entered into a personal union in 1556. Thus continued the rule of the Spanish Habsburgs, from which would emerge the star of our show, Charles II of Spain. Philip II of Spain was Charles II's great-grandfather, and ruled the Spanish Habsburg holdings starting in 1540 as the Duke of Milan, 1554 as the King of Naples and Sicily, Lord of Netherlands in the 1555, and the King of Spain in 1556. Philip II's mother was Isabella of Portugal, and following a succession crisis in 1580, he inherited the crown of her country. His reign ushered in the Spanish Golden Age, allowing a militaristic attitude featuring the conquest of the Inca and the Philippines, 3 unsuccessful Armada-led invasions of Protestant England, supporting the French Catholic League in the French Wars of Religion, fighting against the Dutch Revolt, and defending the Catholic faith from the Ottomans. His reign ended after he got cancer and passed the throne on to his son. Charles II's grandfather, Philip III of Spain, saw another failed attempt at invading English territory, an essentially fully independent Dutch state, and the entrance into the 30 Years' War in 1618. His reign from 1598 until his death in 1621 is generally described as undistinguished and insignificant by scholars. Charles II's father, Philip IV of Spain, ruled Spain and Portugal from 1621 to 1640. Under his rule, the Spanish Empire reached 4.7 million square miles, or 12.2 million square kilometers of territory, but began to decline in other ways due to his mediocre domestic and militaristic policies. At 44, he married his second wife, 14-year-old Maria Anna, who eventually bore him 5 children, 2 of which survived to adulthood: Margarita Teresa, born in 1651, and Charles, born in 1661. If the 30-year age gap wasn't gross enough, the family relations between every single one of Charles II's recent ancestors were astonishing. Inbreeding in general was a common practice among European gentry, but the Habsburg rule over Spain was a special kind of Alabama family time. The family, known for the Habsburg jaw, an example of mandibular prognathism, received notice for the trait when Charles V arrived in Spain, and courtiers observed that he was unable to completely close his mouth due to the condition. His great-grandson, Philip IV, is said to have had the most prominent example of the massive chompers. To really get into the details, let's start with Charles's great-grandfather, Philip II of Spain. He had his son, Philip III, with his niece, Anna of Austria. Anna's parents were also first cousins. Philip III had his son, Philip IV, with Margaret of Austria. They were first cousins once removed. This means that, in this case, Margaret married her cousin Anna's child. On top of that, Margaret's parents were another uncle-niece duo, this time from the Austrian Habsburg side. Philip IV, yet another family lover, married his niece, Mariana of Austria, and with her had his only legitimate son to survive to adulthood, Charles II. Of course, Mariana's parents were also first cousins. To make all of this significantly worse with a visual, take a look at this family tree. As you can see, the Habsburgs really were pros at keeping it in the family. With regular plugins from the Austrian Habsburgs and only 4 of the 28 people in the graphic not being from the same gene pool, this family tree looks more like Japan's population pyramid. If this were a normal family, you'd hope that none of your relatives were having kids with each other instead of all of them. And what do we get from all of the creepy and disturbing images I just put into your mind? Charles II von Habsburg of Spain, ruler of not only half of Europe, but nearly 10% of all land on Earth. We get the man who was so sickly that he was considered in frequent danger of dying. The man who had a single testicle, black as coal. And we get the man whose death triggered one of history's most famous wars, the War of Spanish Succession, finally ending the long and genetically freaky reign of Habsburgs in Spain in a spectacular fashion. Thank you all for watching and listening, and I'll see you next time.